Crew kicked black teen off plane. Laughing TikTok exposed them. CEO apologized on CNN. They say a single moment can change everything. For one teenage passenger named Jordan Harris, that moment happened at 30,000 feet. You might have seen the viral TikTok video grainy phone footage capturing a heated confrontation aboard a flight from Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport to Los Angeles. It started as a quiet journey home for a 16-year-old kid, but it exploded into a national scandal. Airline crews laughing a young black teenager being forced off the plane, and an outraged public searching for answers. Buckle up, because this is the story behind the clip that rocked social media and forced a powerful CEO to apologize on CNN. Jordan Harris tapped his foot nervously against the cold tile floor of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. At 16, he was finally old enough to fly by himself. His parents had saved up for months to send him to Los Angeles. A talented musician and aspiring songwriter, Jordan had been invited to a teen workshop at a music academy near Hollywood. It wasn't just any workshop. It was a chance to show his skills to seasoned producers. His mother, Carla, took a deep breath. She'd never let him travel alone before. "You be careful," she said, her eyes glistening with a mixture of anxiety and pride. She handed him a Tupperware container of homemade brownies to snack on during the flight. "And call me when you land." Jordan nodded dutifully, hugging her tight. His father, Marcel, ruffled his hair in a playful gesture, whispering, "Make us proud." The terminal bustled with travelers. A kaleidoscope of languages mixed in the air. Some people chattered in Spanish, others in French, and many in English. Planes roared overhead in a symphony of modern flight. Jordan felt a surge of excitement. This was his dream trip, a milestone that could change his future. He said goodbye to his parents and moved through security, carefully placing his sneakers into the bin. The officer eyed him for a second, but waved him through. Jordan tried to ignore the flutter of nerves in his stomach. He focused on the adventure awaiting him in Los Angeles. Little did he know, in just a few hours, his excitement would turn to outrage. The smiles he left behind at the gate would fade, replaced by shock and confusion. A flight that should have been routine would ignite a firestorm of controversy neither he nor the airline could ever have anticipated. Jordan walked down the jet bridge with careful steps, listening to the mechanical hum of the plane ahead. Eclipse Air. Flight 607. Read the sign above the gate. The airline's logo, a bold, stylized sun, seemed to promise a bright journey. He clutched his backpack, which contained his prized composition notebook, and a small laptop he used to mix beats. This trip was more than a vacation. It was his shot to shine. He boarded the aircraft and spotted his seat near the window. Seat 22A, just behind the wing. Jordan stashed his backpack under the seat in front of him, careful not to damage his laptop. A tall, stern-looking flight attendant directed him to buckle up. Jordan smiled politely, but the attendant barely acknowledged him. Another crew member, a woman with blonde hair neatly pinned back, started making a loud conversation with the passenger across the aisle, ignoring Jordan entirely. He shrugged it off, attributing it to standard airline bustle. As passengers continued to file in, Jordan glanced around. An older woman with a thick accent struggled with her carry-on, so Jordan stood up to help. The woman thanked him, quietly, relief evident in her eyes. He caught a brief nod from a different flight attendant, who noticed his courtesy. That small moment warmed Jordan's heart. He was taught to help out whenever he could. Once everyone was seated, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Welcome to Eclipse Air Flight 607. He began explaining the journey to Los Angeles International Airport, LAX. Jordan settled into his seat, excited to gaze at the clouds once the plane soared into the sky. A few rows ahead, a man in a business suit scrolled through his phone. Behind Jordan, a family with 2 toddlers was already wrestling with seatbelts. Everything felt normal, just another flight getting ready for takeoff. But sometimes normalcy is only a facade, and in Jordan's case it was about to break in the most public way imaginable. The plane pushed back from the gate. Turbulent emotions swirled inside Jordan, like the plane's engines revving up. He wasn't sure why, but he had an uneasy feeling. Perhaps it was the stern looks from some of the crew, or maybe it was just pre-flight jitters. As the aircraft taxied onto the runway, Jordan flipped through his composition notebook. He'd scribble a line or 2 of lyrics, then scratch them out. His seatbelt was fastened tight, and the brownies his mother had given him were still in his backpack. He promised himself he'd wait until they were at cruising altitude before indulging. The plane accelerated with a roar and lifted off the ground. Jordan's stomach dipped as he felt the gravity pull him back against his seat. He looked out the window, marveling at Atlanta's skyline shrinking beneath him. The sun shone brightly, illuminating cotton-like clouds outside. In that moment, he felt Alev invincible, even. But just as the seatbelt sign dimmed, the blonde flight attendant appeared beside him. "Keep your things stowed," she snapped. Jordan's hands were nowhere near his backpack, but he nodded obediently anyway. She lingered a moment longer, almost as if looking for a reason to scold him before moving on. Jordan stole a glance at the passengers around him, wondering if they sensed anything off. The father behind him was trying to quiet his toddler, and the business-suited man was rummaging through his briefcase. No one seemed aware of the tension that was starting to build. He tried to brush it off, returning to his notebook. If the flight attendant was having a bad day, maybe it had nothing to do with him. He took a deep breath, deciding not to let anything rattle him. Little did he know that was only a small tremor before the real storm hit. At about 30 minutes into the flight, the crew began the drink service. Jordan noticed that the blonde flight attendant bypassed his row without offering him anything. She served the other passengers on either side, but somehow forgot to ask him if he wanted a beverage. Feeling overlooked, Jordan politely raised his hand. "Excuse me," he said in a soft voice. "Could I get some water?" She didn't respond. Instead, she turned to help someone else in the row across the aisle. Jordan exchanged a puzzled glance with the older woman he had helped earlier. The woman's eyes seemed to say, "That's odd." After a minute, Jordan tried again. "Ma'am, could I please have some water?" This time, he spoke a bit louder. The attendant spun around sharply. "I heard you the first time," she snapped, causing nearby passengers to look in their direction. "We're working on it. Please be patient." Her words were coated in icy disdain, and Jordan felt a sting of embarrassment. He sank back into his seat. Out of the corner of his eye, Jordan saw another flight attendant, the tall, stern man from earlier, carrying a tray of drinks. Jordan hoped maybe he'd take over and defuse the situation. Instead, the man passed Jordan's row, offering pretzels to everyone except him. A strange heaviness settled in Jordan's chest. He told himself not to overreact. After all, flight crews are busy. People have off days. But the sense of being singled out crept through his mind. He folded his hands in his lap, determined to remain calm. He had no idea how quickly this minor slight was about to escalate. What started as a missed water cup would become the spark that ignited an entire plane's attention, and eventually the whole internet's wrath. Another 20 minutes crawled by, and Jordan still hadn't received his water. The blonde flight attendant had disappeared behind the curtain at the front of the plane, presumably into the galley. Jordan contemplated hitting the call button, but he dreaded drawing any more negative attention to himself. Finally, he mustered the courage and pressed the call button. A chime resounded overhead. Several passengers glanced his way, curiosity flickering on their faces. Moments later, the tall, stern flight attendant appeared. His name tag read R. Phillips. Jordan noticed the strain in the man's jaw, as though he was already annoyed. "Yes," Phillips said curtly. Could I please have some water?" I asked earlier. But before Jordan could finish, Phillips cut him off. "We're busy. If you needed something, you should have asked when the drinks were being served." Jordan's cheeks burned. I did ask twice, but Phillips made a dramatic sigh. "Look, young man, we have a lot of passengers to serve. If you can't be patient, that's not my problem." Then he turned to go. Jordan felt anger simmer inside. This wasn't just forgetfulness, it was outright hostility. Other passengers began to notice. A few of them exchanged worried looks. The older woman Jordan helped earlier leaned over. "I saw them ignore you on purpose," she whispered sympathetically. Determined not to cause a scene, Jordan let it go. But a creeping sense of injustice filled his thoughts. Why were they treating him like this? He wasn't being loud or disrespectful. Was it because he was flying alone? Or was there something else at play? Little did he know these were only the early ripples of a much bigger wave. What started as a simple request for water would soon lead to accusations, confrontation, and a viral spectacle unlike anything Jordan or Eclipse Air had ever imagined. After the tense exchange, Jordan sat back in his seat, struggling to remain calm. His throat felt dry, both from actual thirst and the emotional chokehold of frustration. A few seats ahead, he noticed a young woman surreptitiously recording something on her phone. Jordan couldn't tell if she was filming him or just capturing the general cabin. Seconds later, a different flight attendant, this one appeared younger, with a name tag that read Beatrice, stopped by Jordan's row. She looked somewhat apologetic. "I'm sorry," she said softly, handing him a cup of water. "We're a bit short-staffed today." Jordan exhaled with relief and thanked her. He took a sip, cooling the burn in his throat. Beatrice paused, seemingly wanting to say more, but then hesitated. Before she could speak further, Phillips called out from down the aisle. "Beatrice, your help is needed in business class." She gave Jordan a quick smile and moved away. That small act of kindness gave Jordan a flicker of hope. Perhaps not everyone on this crew was against him. Maybe he could still get through the rest of the flight without incident. He quietly slipped his headphones on and tried to lose himself in music, imagining the beats he planned to showcase at the workshop. But the air in the cabin felt heavier than normal. Passengers were whispering, casting glances. Some quietly tapped away on their phones. Jordan even overheard a snippet of conversation. "They're treating him differently, right?" asked a middle-aged man to his seatmate. The seatmate nodded sympathetically. Jordan closed his eyes, wishing the flight would speed up land and allow him to walk away from this awkward tension. Little did he know the worst was yet to come, one that would turn a mild humiliation into a headline-grabbing scandal. Jordan flipped through his notebook, jotting down a few lyric ideas. A line about feeling called. The yearning for freedom came to him. It was strangely appropriate for the moment. The flight had been airborne for a little over an hour with another 3 to go. The seatbelt sign was off, and some passengers had started mingling in the aisle or heading to the lavatory. From his window seat, Jordan watched Phillips pass by and overheard snatches of conversation. Kids these days, the flight attendant muttered to a co-worker. So entitled. The co-worker glanced toward Jordan's row, then back at Philip's, as if sharing some unspoken sentiment. Jordan's heart pounded. He tried to focus on his writing, determined not to let the negativity get to him. But his concentration shattered when Phillips turned to another flight attendant, an older woman with graying hair. Some people, Phillips said louder, need to learn that respect is earned. Though the comment wasn't explicitly directed at Jordan, it was obvious who it targeted. A couple of passengers looked toward Jordan in pity. Others simply pretended not to notice. Anger flared within Jordan, but he kept quiet. He'd been raised to avoid confrontation, especially in public. He told himself that once he arrived in LA, he'd never have to see these people again. But an uncomfortable thought burrowed into his mind. What if this is happening because I'm black? He tried to shake off that notion, but the evidence piled up in his mind. The lack of service, the dismissive tone, the open insults. It felt personal. He swallowed the lump in his throat and looked out the window, the clouds passing below like silent witnesses. By the time the seatbelt sign blinked on again for mild turbulence, Jordan realized he was in the midst of a situation that threatened to spiral out of control. The question wasn't if it would escalate, but when. As light turbulence shook the cabin, the pilot's voice crackled on the intercom, advising passengers to remain seated. Jordan fastened his seatbelt and tried to steady his breathing. The tension in the cabin felt more unstable than the plane itself. Suddenly, the blonde flight attendant, the same one who ignored Jordan's initial request for water, walked briskly toward his row. She paused at the seat in front of him, where the older woman sat. We've received reports that someone is using their phone to record crew members without permission, she announced, glancing pointedly at Jordan. The woman in front of Jordan stiffened. I'm not recording anything, she replied, confused. Jordan looked around, remembering the young woman he saw earlier filming. She was 3 rows ahead on the opposite side. The blonde attendant then turned her gaze directly on Jordan. We've also had some complaints about your behavior, she said. Jordan's heart raced. Complaints about me. I haven't done anything. Her voice was loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. I'm telling you now, filming or taking pictures of the crew is not permitted if it disrupts service or violates their privacy. Additionally, you've been causing trouble, demanding special attention. Jordan's face flushed in disbelief. I only asked for water, ma'am. Twice. And I'm not filming anyone. Around them, passengers stirred uncomfortably. Some murmured in Jordan's defense, others shifted in their seats to watch the confrontation. A man in the aisle seat across from Jordan muttered, "This is ridiculous." But the attendant wasn't done. She shot Jordan a glare. We've noted your behavior. Any further issues, and we'll have to take action when we land. Then she turned on her heel and strode back up the aisle. A knot tightened in Jordan's stomach, threatening action for water. He couldn't believe it. The flight still had hours to go, but the sense of foreboding made every second crawl like an eternity. The announcement left a suffocating silence in its wake. Jordan clenched his fists under the tray table, trying to process what just happened. Whispers rustled around him, like restless leaves in a storm. The older woman in front of him reached over the seat divider. Are you okay, dear? She asked in a hushed tone. Jordan nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. He had never been in trouble at school, let alone threatened on an airplane. It felt surreal. A few rows up, the young woman Jordan had spotted earlier with her phone was still filming discreetly. She seemed determined to document the unfolding drama, maybe sensing that the flight attendant's accusations were unjust. A middle-aged couple across the aisle glanced between Jordan and the blonde attendant, concern etched on their faces. When Beatrice, the kinder flight attendant, walked past, she gave Jordan a sympathetic look, but didn't stop. He wondered if she was afraid of crossing Phillips or the blonde attendant who seemed to hold more authority. Jordan tried to sink into his seat, but it offered no refuge. He replayed the events in his mind, searching for anything he might have done to cause this. The memory of that first interaction, just asking for water, was so innocuous. How had it spiraled into accusations and hostility? Turbulence rattled the plane again, a physical manifestation of the social unrest roiling within its cabin. Jordan heard a baby crying a few rows behind the shrill wail cutting through the tension. He considered pressing the call button for an attendant to clarify the accusations against him, but he was terrified it would be used against him again. Moments later, Phillips and the blonde attendant convened in the galley, their hushed voices barely audible. The sense that something bigger was brewing weighed heavily on Jordan and every passenger who sensed the injustice. If only they knew just how big this was going to get. The young woman with the phone, her name was Alicia Shaw, though Jordan wouldn't learn that until later switched on the TikTok app. She had started recording well before the blonde attendant confronted Jordan. Now she zoomed in to catch the tension on Jordan's face, the fear and the stunned confusion. She also recorded the flight attendants chatting in the galley, though the audio was muffled. Alicia was a college student studying social justice issues. She had a knack for recognizing discrimination when she saw it. Her instincts told her that something about the crew's treatment of Jordan was off. As turbulence subsided, she uploaded a short clip of the confrontation, captioning it, "Crew on Eclipse Air, ignoring and threatening teen passenger who just asked for water. Discrimination, mustard flying while black." She pressed post, not realizing the firestorm she was about to ignite. Meanwhile, Jordan scrolled through his own phone, trying to distract himself with music. He noticed a flurry of notifications from his friends back home, but he couldn't bring himself to tell them what was happening. He didn't want his parents to worry either. After all, they had trusted him to travel alone. How could he explain that he was being targeted for reasons he couldn't even fully grasp? Back in the galley, Phillips glared at Alicia whenever he passed. She did her best to appear casual, burying her face in her phone. But the post was already up. Within minutes it began accumulating views. 15,000. 50,000. It seemed unstoppable. Comments poured in from outraged viewers. Some demanded an explanation from Eclipse Air. Others shared their own stories of discrimination. A few trolls made hateful remarks, but the supportive ones far outnumbered them. In the cabin, unaware of the viral storm, Jordan braced himself. Because what happened next would change the trajectory of his life forever. The flight was about halfway to Los Angeles when Phillips marched down the aisle again, stopping abruptly beside Jordan. His stance looked confrontational, hands on hips, chest puffed out like a guard dog ready to pounce. Jordan swallowed hard, meeting his glare. "I need to speak with you, Phillips," said his voice tight. "Stand up." Jordan hesitated, unbuckling his seatbelt. His mind raced. What did they want? Now. Phillips led him toward the back galley, past curious stares. When they reached a corner near the lavatories, the blonde attendant was there, arms folded. Phillips leaned in closer to Jordan. "We have reason to believe you've been filming our crew and posting online. That is against policy and could violate privacy laws." Jordan's eyes widened. "I haven't filmed anything," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I swear, check my phone. I've just been listening to music." The blonde attendant shook her head. "We've received complaints from other passengers. They've seen you holding your phone up." "Don't lie." Jordan's head spun. "But I haven't—" He started to protest, but was cut off. "If you keep causing disruptions," Phillips said, his voice low and menacing, "we'll have to remove you from this flight." "You understand?" Jordan's pulse thundered in his ears. "Remove me." "But we're in the air." Phillips smirked. "We'll land somewhere else if we have to. Don't test us." Fear and anger collided inside Jordan. He felt trapped. Arguing could escalate the situation. Staying silent felt like a betrayal of himself. Still, he managed a nod, blinking back frustrated tears. Phillips and the blonde attendant exchanged triumphant looks, as if they had cornered a troublemaker. "Now go back to your seat and behave," the blonde attendant ordered. Jordan turned heart-pounding, wishing that someone, anyone, would step in and help. But for the moment, he felt utterly alone. A shaky Jordan returned to his seat, feeling every eye in the cabin on him. Once he sat down, he stared at the seat back in front of him, too shaken to meet anyone's gaze. Gradually, though, he noticed subtle signs of support. A sympathetic nod from the father of the toddlers, a gentle smile from the older woman, and a reassuring pat on the shoulder from a middle-aged man across the aisle. Even with the engine's drone, Jordan picked up murmurs around him. Passengers were talking about what had just transpired at the back of the plane. Some said things like, "That was completely unfair," and they're obviously targeting him. Others checked social media on in-flight Wi-Fi, discovering Alicia's TikTok, which was swiftly gaining traction. Noticing the rising chatter, Alicia stood up and walked over to Jordan, quietly asking if he was okay. He responded with a small nod, not trusting his voice. "I've been filming what happened," she whispered. "Just so you know, you're not alone in this." Jordan's eyes welled with tears this time of gratitude. He hadn't realized how desperate he was to hear those words. He managed a faint smile, and Alicia returned to her seat, discreetly continuing to film any interactions with the crew. Some passengers started pressing the call button, asking for managers or supervisors on the flight, demanding an explanation for the crew's behavior. But whenever an attendant arrived, it was either Phillips or the blonde attendant, both wearing stiff expressions. Each complaint was met with condescending assurances. "We are handling the situation," or "Sir, please remain calm." But the flight was anything but calm. Unity was forming among the passengers, and with every tweet, comment, and share of Alicia's TikTok, the pressure on Eclipse Air was mounting. Unbeknownst to them, a storm awaited at LAX like no other. By the time the captain announced their initial descent into Los Angeles, tension had reached an almost unbearable level. Jordan tried to console himself, thinking just a bit longer, and this nightmare will be over. The seatbelt sign clicked on, and the plane gradually descended through layers of cloud. Phillips made a final pass down the aisle, instructing everyone to put their seats and tray tables upright. When he reached Jordan's row, he paused. Their eyes locked in a silent exchange. Phillips finally muttered, "Stay put until everyone else deplanes. We need a word with you." Jordan froze, his heart hammering. A wave of dread crashed over him. What are they going to do? He wondered. Legally, they couldn't arrest him. He hadn't broken any laws, but fear of the unknown made his palms sweat. Some passengers overheard the command, and Alicia gave Jordan a supportive nod. The father with the toddlers whispered something to his wife, who looked outraged on Jordan's behalf. A hush fell over the cabin as the plane finally touched down on the runway, the tires screeching. Everyone rocked forward with the jolt. As they taxied to the gate, Jordan noticed the skyline of Los Angeles through the window. A wave of relief mingled with anxiety. He was finally in the city of his dreams, but under circumstances that felt more like a nightmare. When the plane stopped and the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers began to gather their belongings. Normally, people rushed to exit, but this time, many lingered, casting worried glances at Jordan. Some were filming the final moments of the flight. Even those who had seemed indifferent earlier sensed they were part of something bigger than just a delayed flight. The door opened, and the flight crew ushered everyone off. Everyone except Jordan. And in that charged atmosphere, one question echoed. What now? When the last of the passengers filtered out, Jordan stood swallowing the fear lumped in his throat. He gathered his backpack, clutched his mother's Tupperware of brownies, and stepped into the aisle. Alicia lingered near the front phone, discreetly positioned. Phillips and the blonde attendant blocked Jordan's path. "We've contacted airport security," Phillips declared, not bothering to hide his disdain. "They'll be here momentarily." Jordan's stomach dropped. "For what I didn't do anything wrong," he managed to say, but his voice trembled despite his best efforts to sound confident. "You violated our rules and caused multiple disruptions," the blonde attendant snapped. "That's enough reason to keep you from continuing with us." Jordan almost laughed at the absurdity. "We've already landed," he said quietly. Just then the door of the aircraft swung open wider, revealing two airport security officers. They stepped inside, wearing stern expressions. "Is this the passenger?" asked one, glancing between Jordan and the attendants. Phillips launched into a tirade. He refused to follow crew instructions, was filming us without consent, and caused a disturbance. Jordan felt Alicia's presence behind him, as well as the lingering stares of a few passengers who hadn't fully exited the jet bridge. One of the security officers raised an eyebrow at Phillips. "We'll need statements, but for now, please step aside." Jordan braced himself, expecting to be treated like a criminal. But the second officer glanced at Alicia. "Is there any proof?" he asked, his tone more measured. Alicia spoke up, phone still recording. "I have videos, yes, and he never filmed them. I was the one filming, not him." A tension-filled silence hung in the air. The security officers exchanged glances. Outside gate agents started peering in, sensing the commotion. At that moment, Jordan realized the next few minutes could shape his entire future, and he feared that future was hanging by a thread. Jordan had barely stepped off the plane and onto the jet bridge when he felt a rush of uncertainty flood his chest. The stares of curious onlookers pressed in on him like a heavy weight, and overhead the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows. Phillips stood just behind Jordan, arms crossed, while the blonde flight attendant, Elena Brown, as her name tag read, lingered near the airplane door, her posture rigid with indignation. A hush seemed to fall over the area, which was unusual for a busy airport terminal. A couple of families paused in the corridor, suitcases rolling to a stop on the scuffed floor. A gate agent hovered nearby, phone in hand. It was as if everyone sensed something was about to happen. Jordan glanced around, feeling as though he were caught in a spotlight. Before he could speak, two uniformed airport security officers arrived, their heavy footsteps echoing on the polished floors. One was a tall man with graying temples and a calm, measured demeanor. The other was younger, standing stiffly, eyes flicking between Jordan, Phillips, and Elena. Phillips took a step forward and pointed at Jordan, his voice bristling with frustration. "That's him," he declared. He refused to comply with multiple crew instructions. He was filming us, possibly live streaming and causing a disturbance. "We need you to address this immediately." Jordan opened his mouth to protest, but found his voice lodged in his throat. Filming. That wasn't me. He felt overwhelmed by the injustice of being accused of something he hadn't done. He swallowed the knot in his throat and tried to steady his breathing heart, pounding like a drum in his chest. By now, more passengers had begun to gather. Some had deplaned, walked a few steps, and then turned around to watch. Others who had witnessed the mid-flight drama refused to leave until they saw what happened to the teenager who had been threatened with removal, the father of the toddlers still balancing one fussy child on his shoulder, boldly stepped forward, raising his hand as though it were a classroom. "Excuse me, officers," he said firmly, yet politely. "I was sitting a few rows behind this young man. He did not film anyone. If there was any filming, it wasn't from his seat." Elena crossed her arms tighter, her gaze flitting nervously toward the growing group of passengers. "We received complaints," she insisted, though her voice shook slightly. "Our policy is very clear." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. The older woman whom Jordan had helped with her luggage earlier pushed forward gently, her face set in determination. "I can confirm," she spoke up. "This boy did nothing but ask for water, politely, I might add, and then out of nowhere he was being reprimanded by the flight attendants." Alicia, still holding her phone, joined them. She made no attempt to hide that she was recording. "I have video footage," she said, her tone measured but resolute. "Jordan never once aimed his phone at the attendants. I was the one filming because I saw what was happening. And I also have footage of the flight attendants threatening him, telling him he'd be removed from the plane if he caused more trouble." The older security officer lifted an eyebrow and shifted his focus to Alicia. "You have footage?" he asked. "From the flight itself?" She nodded, tapping her phone screen. "I've posted some of it to social media already. You can see it for yourself." Phillips's face paled, and Elena let out a sharp breath as though she'd been struck. Jordan could almost feel the tension radiating from them. It was one thing to accuse a quiet, lone teenager. It was another to be confronted by multiple witnesses and video evidence. Other passengers chimed in, growing braver by the moment. A middle-aged man wearing a business suit spoke up. "I'm not much of a social media person, but I watched this whole thing unfold. It was completely unprovoked. The crew singled him out. A woman next to him nodded in agreement. They refused to serve him, then claimed he was the problem." Jordan stood there, head spinning, as the crowd's testimonies united into a collective protest. He felt both vulnerable and oddly hopeful at the same time. Only minutes ago, he had been terrified he would be taken away by security, branded a troublemaker. But now the presence of these supportive voices began to lift the weight off his chest. The younger security officer cleared his throat. "Sir," he said to Phillips, "it doesn't sound like this passenger did anything that warranted security intervention. Do you have any definitive proof of your allegations?" Phillips glared at the officer, then at Alicia's phone, clearly realizing how quickly the narrative was slipping from his control. "What we have," Phillips began, struggling to keep his voice level, "is a disruption in the cabin and multiple complaints." But he was abruptly cut off by Alicia, who swung her phone screen around. The video played a snippet, Jordan politely asking for water, the attendant's dismissive responses, and finally Phillips's menacing threat near the lavatories. The audio was somewhat muffled, but Phillips's words were unmistakable. "If you keep causing disruptions, we'll have to remove you from this flight." Stunned silence fell over the group. A few audible gasps rippled through the onlookers. One of the security officers clenched his jaw. then exhaled slowly, turning back to Jordan. "Son, I'm sorry this has happened to you," he said. "It seems there's a misunderstanding or worse going on here. Based on what we've heard and now seen on video, I don't see cause to detain you. You're free to go. If you want, we can take a statement for further action." Phillips and Elena exchanged panicked looks, their once authoritative demeanor reduced to anxious glances and shifting feet. In that moment, Jordan realized how close he had come to being punished for nothing more than asking for a basic courtesy and quite possibly for flying while black. The thought sent a cold shiver down his spine. But at the same time, warmth flooded his heart from seeing how strangers had rallied around him. Alicia reached out and gave Jordan a reassuring squeeze on his arm. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly, noticing how tightly he was gripping his backpack strap. Jordan managed a nod. "I think so." He breathed, still shaken, but immensely grateful. "Thanks. Thank you all." That's when the father with the toddler turned to the security officers again. "He deserves an apology, at the very least," he said, anger creeping into his voice. The older security officer looked pointedly at Phillips and Elena. They fumbled with their words, but the crowd's expectant silence demanded some sort of acknowledgement. Finally, Eleanor mumbled something resembling an apology, though it dripped with reluctance. Phillips couldn't bring himself to look Jordan in the eyes, muttering, "We were only following protocol," under his breath. The tension lingered, but the crucial victory was clear. Jordan would not be taken away. He was free to continue his life beyond this gate, though the aftershock of these events would follow him long after he left LAX. In that charged moment on the jet bridge, passengers found unity in their outrage. Their collective voices resonated louder than any single phone recording or corporate policy. They had witnessed firsthand how quickly an innocent request could spiral into an act of targeted hostility. And in speaking up, they had shattered that hostility, at least for one teenager, on a journey that had begun with excitement and nearly ended in a nightmare. With each testimony, Jordan felt a renewed sense of hope. Maybe he thought there's still justice in the world, even if it takes a crowd, a camera, and a lot of courage to make it happen. Despite everything he had just endured, he knew he wasn't alone. And that truth, more than any formal apology, was the solace he needed as he stood there amid the gathering crowd, trembling but triumphant. While Jordan's confrontation played out on the jet bridge at LAX, in a sleek, high-rise office, states away Eclipse Air's corporate communications team scrambled. Within an hour of Alicia's TikTok post, the video had racked up hundreds of thousands of views. Major news outlets began reaching out for statements. The airline's social media accounts were flooded with messages demanding answers. Inside a boardroom with panoramic windows, Eclipse Air executives watched the video footage in disbelief. The Vice President of Public Relations, Georgia Sampson, paced back and forth. "This is a PR nightmare," she said, glancing at the thousands of furious comments. "We can't ignore this or spin it lightly. People are calling it a blatant act of discrimination." In the corner, a junior communications specialist tried to handle the deluge of Twitter and Facebook notifications. They're using hashtags like #boycott-eclipse and #flying. While black, he reported grimacing at the rapid increase in trending status. Eclipse Air's CEO, Peter Caldwell, a polished man in his late 50s, entered the boardroom. He'd been alerted of the situation mid-afternoon and had rushed in from an off-site meeting. "What do we have?" he asked tersely, scanning the anxious faces of his team. Georgia Sampson filled him in. A teenage passenger, Jordan Harris, was allegedly harassed and kicked off, or nearly kicked off, Flight 607 from Atlanta to LAX. Multiple passengers are corroborating his story. Video evidence is going viral. Caldwell's expression darkened. We need a statement and we need it. Now, he said. Acknowledge the situation, say we're investigating and ensure the public that we won't tolerate discrimination. Get the flight crew's statement, but we need to be prepared to remove them from duty immediately if necessary. The team nodded, throwing themselves into damage control mode. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, the story wasn't just words on a screen. It was Jordan Harris's life, a life about to be dissected by millions and judged by corporate authorities scrambling for a quick fix. Back at LAX, a crowd gathered near the arrival gate for Eclipse Air Flight 607. Word had spread fast through social media, and local reporters arrived with cameras and microphones. Airline staff tried to maintain order, herding onlookers away from the restricted area. Jordan, still trembling from the ordeal, stood beside Alicia and a few other supportive passengers. The security officers had taken initial statements, and after hearing from multiple eyewitnesses, they cleared Jordan of any wrongdoing. But that didn't end the spectacle. In fact, it was just beginning. The moment Jordan exited into the public terminal, a swarm of cameras flashed. Journalists shouted questions, Warden. Do you believe you were targeted because of your race? Jordan, how are you feeling after being threatened with removal from the flight? What do you want Eclipse Air to do about this? He raised a hand to shield his face from the blinding lights. Anxiety surged in his chest. He had never been in front of a camera crew before, let alone this many. Alicia, seeing his discomfort, gently guided him through the throng, urging reporters to give him space. But the questions only grew more aggressive. A local news reporter managed to corner Jordan. Do you plan on taking legal action? She asked. Jordan blinked, unsure. The entire ordeal was only hours old. Legal action hadn't even crossed his mind. Before he could answer, the father of the toddlers interjected, they owe him an apology, that's for sure. Somewhere in the cacophony, the blonde attendant and Phillips slipped away, escorted by Eclipse Air supervisors, their faces drawn tight with tension. The press hardly noticed they were too fixated on Jordan the teen, at the heart of what was quickly becoming a national controversy. As the barrage of questions continued, Jordan felt an odd surge of determination. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe it was the realization that so many people were rallying behind him. Either way, he mustered the courage to speak. Offering just one sentence, I just want fairness, and I want this never to happen to anyone else again. In the hours and days that followed, the viral fury against Eclipse Air only intensified. Alicia's TikTok reached over 5 million views by the next morning, boosted by influencers and celebrities who chimed in with their own condemnations of discrimination. #Justice for Jordan soared to the top of Twitter's trending list. News outlets across the country picked up the story. CNN, MSNBC, local affiliates in Atlanta and Los Angeles. Cable news channels replayed clips of Jordan's quivering voice and the flight attendant's confrontational stance. Commentary programs invited legal experts, civil rights advocates, and airline spokespeople to weigh in. Eclipse Air began feeling the consequences immediately. Bookings dropped and social media was awash with customers vowing to cancel future flights. The company's stock price dipped noticeably within 2 days. CEO Peter Caldwell issued a short written statement on Eclipse Air's website, promising a full investigation, but it did little to quell the public outcry. Behind the scenes, Caldwell called for an urgent internal review. The flight attendants involved Phillips, the blonde attendant named Elena Brown, and others who had been present were placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. Employee morale across the airline plummeted. Many felt the company's quick move to distance itself from the flight attendants signaled blame without due process. Others believed the airline had no choice but to take swift action given the severe backlash. Meanwhile, Jordan tried to keep his head above water. His phone rang non-stop. Journalists hounded him for interviews. Family members asked how they could help, and classmates back home bombarded him with messages of support. Despite the chaos, Jordan made it to his music workshop, receiving a standing ovation from fellow students when he arrived late. Yet the swirl of media attention and corporate backlash weighed heavily on his mind, threatening to overshadow the very dream he had come to pursue in Los Angeles. A week after the infamous Flight 607, Jordan found himself seated in a modest television studio in Los Angeles, across a split screen from Eclipse Air's headquarters, where CEO Peter Caldwell sat. They were appearing live on CNN for an exclusive interview, moderated by anchor Brianna Mitchell. The lead-up had been intense. Jordan's story dominated national headlines, and public pressure demanded a direct on-camera response from the airline's highest authority. Jordan fidgeted in his chair, wearing a crisp button-down shirt someone from CNN's wardrobe had provided. He took a deep breath and glanced at the cameras. On the opposing screen, Caldwell wore a dark suit, his tie impeccably knotted, his demeanor serious. Mr. Caldwell, Brianna began the viral video. Has outraged millions. Do you believe your crew had acted in a discriminatory manner, and what are you prepared to do about it? Caldwell cleared his throat. First, I want to personally apologize to Jordan Harris. No passenger, no human being should ever feel unwelcome or discriminated against on an Eclipse Air flight. Our company prides itself on diversity and respect, and what occurred on Flight 607 did not meet our standards. Jordan listened, his heart pounding. Though Caldwell spoke calmly, Jordan sensed the gravity of the situation. This was more than a corporate PR move. It was a matter of public trust. Still, he couldn't help but wonder if the apology was genuine or merely damage control. Caldwell continued. We have conducted preliminary interviews and placed the involved crew on leave. We will be implementing mandatory bias training for all employees and reviewing our policies to ensure a situation like this never happens again. He turned to the camera, addressing Jordan directly. We are deeply sorry, Jordan. We hope you'll give us a chance to make this right. Jordan swallowed hard, trying to articulate a response. Thank you, he said, voice trembling slightly. But I also hope this is a lesson that goes beyond me, that nobody else has to go through something like this. A hush fell across the studio. The apology was out there, but whether it would truly heal the scars left by the ordeal remained an open question. In the weeks following the CNN interview, events took a swift turn that some would call karmic. Elena Brown, the blonde flight attendant, was fired after a thorough investigation uncovered multiple passenger complaints of her mistreating travelers of color. Phillips faced a formal disciplinary hearing. It surfaced that he had been the subject of internal complaints before. Ultimately, the airline terminated his employment, citing a pattern of unprofessional conduct. While some observers criticized Eclipse Air for scapegoating individuals to placate public anger, others saw it as a necessary step toward accountability. The airline's stock price recovered slightly, but remained below pre-scandal levels. Calls for systemic reform in the airline industry grew louder, prompting discussions about everything from bias training to passenger rights. Jordan received a personal invitation from Eclipse Air to fly anywhere he wished free of charge as part of the airline's attempt to make amends. He politely declined explaining that he still didn't feel comfortable flying with them. Instead, he focused on his music workshop, where he wrote a heartfelt piece titled Sky's Reflection, a composition that channeled his anger, fear, and eventual triumph. For Alicia, her TikTok fame soared. She used her newfound platform to advocate for social justice, shining a light on issues affecting marginalized communities, especially within corporate systems. She remained in touch with Jordan, and they considered collaborating on future projects, her filmmaking, his music, hoping to drive change through creative expression. As for CEO Peter Caldwell, he struggled with backlash from shareholders who felt the scandal had been mishandled. Yet in public, he maintained a dignified stance, reiterating the company's commitment to prevent any repeat incidents. Whether his promise signaled genuine reform or a temporary PR fix would only be revealed in time. In the end, what started as a simple flight for a teenage musician became a catalyst for accountability and a cautionary tale of how quickly injustice can be exposed in the digital age. Sometimes hard karma doesn't merely strike individuals. It reverberates through entire institutions, leaving everyone to face the aftermath. And there you have it, a story that began with a routine flight from Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport and ended in a national reckoning broadcast live on CNN. In a world where a single phone camera can topple corporate walls, Jordan Harris's plight reminded us all that justice and humanity must guide our day-to-day actions. The fallout from that fateful flight sparked changes in Eclipse Air's policies and forced its highest leaders to acknowledge systemic issues within their own ranks. But more importantly, it awakened countless people to the power of speaking up against injustice, no matter how high in the sky it takes place. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us shed light on more stories that demand to be heard. Together, let's keep the conversation going and keep fighting for what's right.